At Madeline's service yesterday, I had reason to remember an occasion that happened really about 10 years ago today. I think it was almost exactly 10 years ago today. I had accepted a call to the First Reformed Church of Schenectady and was still serving up in Knox and Townsend's Lake Reformed churches up in the hill towns, which some of you know quite well. And I think it was a Sunday afternoon, and we were just sort of kind of resting at our home and just kind of decompressing a little bit. At least I was decompressing after a Sunday, which is what I need to do on a Sunday afternoon. And I got a phone call. And on the other end of the line was a voice that was clear and strong and earnest. It was the voice of the leader of Group 5 who said, "Hello, Daniel, this is Barbara Landon. I'm the leader of Group 5 down at the First Reformed Church of Schenectady, and we want you to come and talk to us on May 1st, which is next Monday." It was such a strong and clear voice, and it was a congregation to which I was headed, and so I said, "Yes, of course. What time would that be?" And there began a life, now 10 years, almost 10 years on May 1st, a life among this congregation where I have gotten to know this congregation, I think, fairly well. Given my role and responsibilities here, I've gotten to know your lives. Most of you, I've gotten to sit in your homes or sit with you in the office or be with you in the hospital or just sort of learn from you in the hallway here about your life and about the ways in which your lives are paths of righteousness. Paths of righteousness. It has been one of the gifts within this calling here at this congregation to witness the ways in which, the myriad of ways in which you inhabit the paths of righteousness that lead to the blessing of the world and to God's glory. Each has their own way, and each of you follow that way at various times, as we noted in Madeline's service yesterday, sometimes very, very well, and at other times, well, not doing as I ought. But those paths of righteousness to which we are called are just such a gift to witness and to participate in, because it is that to which God calls us. I'm thinking of so many paths as I thought this week about the ways in which we are called by God to live out those righteous ways. And it's the Psalm 23 really sort of highlights some of those, and the reading from the first letter of John illuminates some others. And I just want to kind of think about 5 of the characteristics of these paths of righteousness to which we're called and in which we walk. The first sort of characteristic of these paths of righteousness is that they come from God. It is God who calls us to paths of righteousness. These don't originate necessarily in ourselves or in other people, although because the Spirit is at work in us, we may be the first one to identify that. We may be the first one to say, "Oh, that's what needs to be done." But at other times, it's somebody else who says, "Hey, come along with me to feed those people down, the hungry children down at Steinmetz Park." Sometimes it comes from others. Sometimes it comes from inside of us. But they all come from God, who is our good shepherd and leads us in those paths of righteousness. Secondly, these paths are rooted in and are responsive to the love that is shown in Jesus Christ. Christ is our foundation we note again and again in our covenant, Jesus Christ is the one who is central for us. And so our ways of walking in paths of righteousness will be imitations of his. We will walk in ways of self-giving love that are responsive to the good news that we hear week after week, day after day in the Gospels, and the writings and the Psalms, ways that correspond to the life of Jesus. Thirdly, a characteristic of these paths of righteousness that we're to walk in, and that we do walk in, is that they're going to cost us something. They are going to make a demand upon our lives. They will not simply kind of just overflow in bounty and ease and splendor, but they will make a demand upon us. Now, sometimes that demand will be one that we are glad to meet and that we rise up. Sometimes the demand that they make upon our lives is that which Frederick Buechner sort of ruminates on when he talks about vocation. Vocation is where our deep joy meets the world's deep need. Where our deep joy meets the world's deep need. And so there are times in which we will give of ourselves for others and feel the energy and the joy and the delight of serving God. We will run and not grow weary. We will walk and not grow faint. In fact, our joy will just sort of get ramped up in our service. And that's a gift. And it's not always the case. Because sometimes the self-giving love to which we are called is arduous and difficult and even heart-wrenching. Like going to visit a beloved friend of years and years who no longer recognizes us. Like caring for a member of one's family, be it a spouse or a child or a parent or an aunt, and seeing their diminishment and just weeping inside or weeping with them. But it is love. And it is to love that we are called. And it is in love that we shall follow. So it will cost us something. And whether that love costs us in the family of faith, or whether that love costs us within our own families of origin, or within the larger human family. And remember, our love is to extend beyond ourselves to the world that God so loved. Or whether Stacy reminded us earlier today in our need for God to beyond the human family to all those that God loves, the creatures of the earth, the birds, the bison, the cattle, the dogs, the cats, to all God's creatures. That love will cost us something in self-control and in self-giving. And sometimes the laying down of our lives, as the first letter of John has it, in this costing us something, it's strong language, isn't it? To lay down your life as Jesus laid down his life. It is sacrifice that we're talking about here. It is sacrifice that we're talking about. And that sacrifice is what God models for us and God invites us into. So we lay down our lives of convenience sometimes because it would be easier not to add another thing to our schedules. Sometimes we lay down our lives of ease because it'd be so much nicer just to stay at home in front of the TV to watch our favorite show. Sometimes we lay down our lives of great bounty and give out of our excess to those who have so much less and are in need. It is going to cost us something. This past week, one of the members of our church who couldn't be with us today, Theo Lovell, heard that one of her ministers was in distress over not having finished his thesis proposal. And Theo Lovell laid down her time and wrote me a letter and sent me a sermon preached at Union Presbyterian Church years ago to encourage me in my own work, in my path of righteousness that I'm seeking to walk with you, of bringing to the forefront our care of creation, from the periphery into being a central value of our church. Theo Lovell laid down convenience and laid down ease and laid down care for herself to care for me. It will cost us. And fourthly is this: the paths of righteousness that we walk should not muck up the earth any more than we have. They should not sully the clean waters that God gives to us and all creatures. The paths of righteousness that we walk should be done in respect for, in honor for, the Good Shepherd who loves the world. Not only because every day is Earth Day, but because this earth is the Lord's. And we are stewards. We are servants. We are caretakers of. So as we walk in the paths of righteousness with Kathy and those who walk in the crop walk, as we walk in the paths of righteousness with those who clean up the earth, whether it's in Scotland or whether it's in Schenectady, as we walk in the paths of righteousness in sacrificial love, in self-giving of our time and our treasures and our talents, let us walk with integrity and respect for the creation that God has made. And fifth and finally, the paths of righteousness that we are to walk will be characterized that they lead to God's glory and not our own self-aggrandizement. We will, when we receive kind of thanksgiving, when we receive praise, when we receive honor, will say, it is by grace that I walk in this way, because of the love that God has shown me, through which I show you the same love. We will give witness to the one who has walked the way before us, and glory in God, whose Spirit gives us the love and the vision and the fortitude to keep on walking in the ways of righteousness. Amen.